Welcome to the Perrysburg Podcast, episode 145. I'm your host, Perrysburg resident Kim Newlove. The Perrysburg Podcast is a resource for Perrysburg residents. We talk about what's in Perrysburg and why people like to live here. Our website is perrysburgpodcast.com. Today's episode is about the Fort Meigs Historic Site, and my guest is John Thompson. John is the manager of historic programming and the head of interpretation at Fort Meigs Historic Site. You'll learn more about John and his roles during our interview. Now, the address of the fort for your GPS is 29100 West River Road in Perrysburg, Ohio. If you've ever driven past the fort and thought, I should really check that out sometime, well, this episode's for you. In this episode, you'll learn what to see and do at Fort Meigs, what not to miss inside the fort and the museum, and how to experience the Fort Meigs Historic Site in a way that really brings history to life. We also talk about how the community uses the space and how to enjoy it while respecting its history. Without further ado, here's my conversation with John Thompson. Hi, John. Welcome to the Perrysburg Podcast.
Hello. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. You are one of the big attractions in Perrysburg, or should I say, the Fort Meigs Historic Site is one of the big attractions, and you along with it, right?
I hope so. That's fabulous of you to say. Yep. My name is John Thompson. I work at Fort Meigs Historic Site here, 1812 Battlefield, right in our community. And it's a wonderful resource for everyone in the world, really, not certainly for local Perrysburgers as well, but we get visitors from all over the globe and certainly military historians and researchers from all over the nation as well. So it's a fabulous place to work. It is wonderful if you love being outside, which I certainly enjoy. So I get to be outside every day. It's a wonderful place to work if you don't want to do the same thing every day. And no 2 days are alike at the fort. And because we're such a small staff, you're going to end up wearing many hats anyway. So it is a wonderful place to stay fresh in terms of all of your work. But I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. At the signature of your email, there's a little designation that says you're the manager of historic planning and the head of interpretation. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Can you explain that a little bit? Like, what's your role there?
Manager of historic programming means that I am dealing with all of our large scale events there and coordinating both internally and externally with whatever's going on. Designing those events, the schedules for those events, the people that will be involved in those events, and basically the head of what's going on outdoors in the historic fort there. The head of interpretation, interpretation in history is basically what information is being presented to the audience, how it's being presented. You have to really know and control everything about the clothing that people are wearing, if their buttons are correct, if their shoes and their shoelaces are correct. We are a historically accurate site, so when you walk through the gates of Fort Meigs, it's like you are in 1813, and everything should be. And we spend a lot of time researching to make sure that we have everything correct, because it's our job to be educating. It is our job to be entertaining as well. And we're dedicated to intense historical research, and that is the head of interpretation. So that means education programs, what school kids are learning, making sure that it lines up with the curriculums for the state and things like that, trying to maybe dictate some of the research and how it gets out to the public, that sort of thing. So, like I said, it's a wonderful place to work and very diverse tasks each day.
I'm one of those people that doesn't like to do the same thing every single day. I'm glad you brought that up because any young person listening to this might need to hear that it is possible to have a job where you don't do the same thing every single day. Thanks for talking about your roles. Now, I just want to tell you, when I moved to town, I didn't realize that it was kind of like a museum. Is that the right way to think of the Fort Meigs Historic Site? Kind of like a battlefield, of course, it's part of history, but the building itself and then inside the walls of the fort, I think of it like a museum. Is there a different way that you would term it?
I definitely think of it as a museum, and museum studies are something that the staff focuses on and continues learning. The Fort Meigs Visitor Center, yes, was built in 2003, and it houses not only our staff research library, but also an artifact museum that takes the audience through the lure of the land, really, the history of Ohio, the history of its people, the coming of statehood, the origins of the War of 1812, and then Fort Meigs's role in the War of 1812. The artifacts that are on display in that museum are all archaeological treasure from our battlefield. So they were all dug up on the property, and their story is told through the museum. And then, how we know what we know. What do historians do? What do archaeologists do? And the combination of those two fields bringing about what a museum is. So that museum, the indoor museum, is open year round. The outdoor space is seasonal. So we're looking at from April 1st until the end of October each year. We do have 7 blockhouses outside. Each one is its sort of freestanding exhibits within. So as you wander around the fort, you are confronted with different subject matter in each of the houses to tell you a little bit about the story of the Army's time there, the battles, how it was designed and constructed originally in the 19th century, what it was like to live in Fort Meigs, what it was like to be in the Army in the early 19th century, the soldier experience, women's roles and medicine at the time, as well as all the military equipment that would be there that you can see and touch, artillery and ropes and, all of the camp equipment that would be there.
You have cannons there somewhere too, right? Out at the outdoor area?
Outdoor area, we have 5 artillery batteries at Fort Meigs, and some of the guns are there strictly for display. Many of them are in use, and we do fire the artillery regularly for our large events. So it's quite a good show for people to see, and I'm sure everyone in Perrysburg, at least within a mile or so, can hear the booms from time to time.
I have heard the booms, and it reminds me of living in Toledo. I used to live not too far from the University of Toledo,
Mhm.
and when the Rockets would score, they would blow a cannon. Do you
Oh,
remember
okay.
that?
I do not remember that. I did not live, I guess, within earshot of it, but I'm a sort of a recent transplant to Toledo. I spent most of my formative years in Cleveland and actually came over here to Toledo for the job at Fort Meigs about 9 years ago. So,
Nice, nice.
mhm.
How do you like Perrysburg?
Perrysburg is a beautiful city. I have got to know a lot of the people that live around the fort, people that work in local government and stuff like that, firefighters, policemen, all that kind of stuff are regular, either visitors or just checking up on the place like that. But Perrysburg is kind of spacious. That's nice. So if you're looking to breathe some air, I think Perrysburg is a good place for that.
Thank you for saying that. Coming from Cleveland with all of the skyscrapers and the traffic, I can imagine this would be very spacious to
Hmm.
someone like you who's
Hmm.
used to being a city dweller.
Hmm.
Before I pressed record, you had mentioned that you live now in Toledo, but it's really nice to hear the thoughts of somebody who didn't grow up here and how you find it. You like it, huh?
Yeah, I never thought about that before, but yeah, the sun shines here, I guess.
It
More
has some
so
good
than
qualities.
the lakeshore of Cleveland, which can be a pretty cloudy place. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So literally the sun shines more. It's not just like a
Literally, the
happy
sun
place.
shines here more. Yeah.
Got it. I am with you on that. All right, back to the visitors center and the outdoor area. I want to use the right terminology. So the building itself is called the visitors center, right?
The modern building. Yep.
Okay. And then what do you call the structure with all of the wooden spikes and I forget what they're called, but the walls?
Yep. That is the fort. That is historic Fort Meigs. The palisade wall is made of wooden pickets. Yes.
Pickets, that's the word.
Over 3,000 pickets. The wall itself is just under a mile in length if we stretched it out. And inside Fort Meigs is a good 10 acres of property. So no matter where people are visiting from, if they're right down the street or if they're from anywhere in the country, everyone is struck with how large Fort Meigs is. If you're a fort person, You're used to something that is maybe a single building or a little stockade that might be a half acre. But when you come to Fort Meigs and it's 10 times the size of what you imagine, people are just blown away. The fort was the largest fort during the War of 1812. And still today, this is the largest wooden walled fort ever built on the continent. So it has that special distinction. And yep, the palisade wall, and then six large blockhouses. These are double timber construction, what the Army called. They are the larger of the two sizes that the Army would have built at the time. So Fort Meigs is just massive and quite beautiful, I should say. I will give applause to our maintenance crew that care for the lawns and care for the grass, care for the plant life, to keep it a very beautiful green space for visitors, to maintain that the sense of peace that a battlefield has after the fact, after the traumatic death and things like that. Battlefields always tend to be these peaceful, serene places that have a strange calming effect, and I think our fort has that to a tremendous degree, actually.
It is beautiful, and I've seen it for the past almost 20 years that I've lived here, and I didn't know some of the things that you just said, that it's the biggest in the United States, right?
It's the biggest in North America, so that
North
would be
America.
all of the United States, Mexico, Canada, yeah, the
Wow.
continent, yeah. It has to be that size for what the Army intended it to be when they're here. So Fort Meigs will be essentially a campground with a wall around it. And it's really how much space an entire army takes up when they're encamped in the field on campaign. And it's not just men in their tents to live in, but you're talking about horses, draft animals. You're talking about all the supplies that they need, barrels of flour and gunpowder and yeah, salted meat, food, shoes, everything. It's going to be jam packed with activity during its high point in 1813 during the war, and that massive footprint is what you can tour today.
How'd you learn about the War of 1812?
The War of 1812 is really it's a really good story for the Great Lakes region of North America. The war itself is fought largely on the US Canadian border. So if you're a local, that means that this area is going to be really critical to the war effort. Our proximity to Canada, the western end of Lake Erie, the Detroit River, and things like that. So, New England has the battlefields of the American Revolution, the birthplace of independence. That's their story. The American South has the battlefields of the Civil War and that story. But the War of 1812 is very much a story of the Great Lakes. It's the time when this area is being settled by Americans for the first time. And so, if you're into local history, that is a major point, a major high point in studying local history. I've been interested in history, military history, my entire life, so it was just sort of a natural fit. And even growing up, I was aware of Fort Meigs. I knew that it existed as a historic site, as a tourable facility. And so when the job opened up, it was an opportunity that I jumped at.
Good to have you in Perrysburg helping everyone learn about the War of 1812 and the Fort Meigs Historic Site.
Hmm.
Very
Thank you.
cool. Now, going back to the Visitors Center, for anybody who's never been there before, what are the top one or two things that they absolutely have to see when they go there?
One or two things that they absolutely have to see when they go there. I would seek out an individual in historic clothing, and I would ask them, what they're doing, what their job is. We have interpreters there, living historians who dress the part. They can be soldiers, they can be craftspeople, laborers, they can be women, doctors, all that kind of thing. And again, going back to interpretation, everything is studied down, so they can really immerse you in the idea that you're stepping back in time. As far as the museum itself, some of the more incredible artifacts that we have a number of uniforms from the War of 1812, so you can see actual pieces and just just the things from everyday life from over 200 years ago, you know, how they fished, how they gardened, things like that. Those are things that we all share still today, and that can pull us and tie us to the past a little bit more closely, a little bit more dearly, I think, if it's something that you can relate to. But everybody has a different opinion, I suppose, on what would be the most important thing. Everyone learns in a different way. So if it's reading is how you learn, or if it's listening is how you learn, or just seeing, touching the fort itself, we do a lot of activities um, with individuals that have deficiencies in the senses, the blind, the deaf, and things like that. We have specialty tours for all that. So you can smell history, you can touch it if you need to. So everyone's experience is very, very different. And we try to tailor what we're talking about to suit you, to suit your needs, to suit your interests. And, if you are into historical cooking, we can talk about that. So if baking is your thing, we can talk about that. If woodworking is your thing, that's something. Everything can be tied to the War of 1812, and because Fort Meigs is such a massive city unto itself during the war, all that sort of thing is going on. So I'm not sure if I answered your question about the one thing. I think I talked about everything instead. If you want to know my favorite artifact in the museum,
Sure.
it is a musician's coat from the Ohio militia in 1812. And we know who the individual was who wore it. His name was Henry Hook. He was a musician, as I said, and he came through this area in the summer of 1812 on his way to Detroit, where he will be captured. And the war basically ends for him at the age of 15. What's remarkable about the coat is that he lived as an individual until he was 62 years of age, and he took on a different profession. But the coat is pristine, which means that it hung in the back of his closet his whole life. He never repurposed it, the fabric, for other things. He never threw it away, the way you would when you move your home, you get rid of stuff. He kept that coat his whole life. That means that coat, his experience had a tremendous impact on his life, and he wouldn't part with it. He looked over it from time to time. And I think it speaks volumes to the idea that we today, we don't look at the War of 1812. It just doesn't loom large in the imaginations of most Americans. It's not something we know a lot about. But this was a conflict that affected an entire generation of men and women, young Americans, the first generation of true born Americans. And I think that coat and the fact that he kept it his whole life speaks to that his experience as a teenager was so impactful that he couldn't part with it, and he kept it pristine his whole life. And then his descendants kept it pristine in memory of him. So it's just one story of 1,000 from the fort, but those are the sort of magical impacts that you have at the fort. I talked about the serenity of the battlefield and the sort of the echo of the soldiers that were there and the ability to feel that. Um, Fort Meigs is a powerful place.
I appreciate and accept your answer, sir.
Thank you.
That was so much more than I expected, and I have never looked for that musician's coat. So next time I go there, I will have to check that out.
It's pretty rare to see a musician's coat from the War of 1812. Musicians represent about 2% of the Army at the time, and so it's just a very rare thing. And to have one is pretty special from a collections standpoint in a museum field.
Very cool. Like I
Mhm.
said, next time I'm there, I will check that out.
I'll show it to you myself.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll do that. I will look forward to that. Now, when you go outside, there's the actual fort. You said that some people enjoy actually touching it, or they like to go in what are the houses called
The
again?
blockhouses
Block
is, yep,
houses.
yep.
Okay, what are maybe the top two or three things that somebody who's never been there before should look for and definitely not miss?
Well, the experience inside the fort is as long or as short as you want it to be. To walk the entire fort, you're going to be doing just under a mile, And we do have a pathway with interpretive panels to kind of guide you in what you're looking at and just different aspects of the fort or the history there. The special blockhouse, I think, for everybody is either the one that's set up as the troops would have known it, sort of as a guard tower during the war, or the one that focuses strictly on the battles. A lot of people, that's the main draw, is the fact that Fort Meigs is a battle. It is a tremendous turning point in the war, the battles that are fought there. And the timeline in that blockhouse, number 6, kind of stretches out the entire year of 1813, the leadership that it's there. And there's a whole list of panels in there, primary sources, the quotes from men that lived at Fort Meigs that fought in the battles and their firsthand experience of what it was like fighting there. And so you can read all of those words. And that's another thing that ties you in. You know, a primary source is the closest we can be to actually being there to witness the battle, to hear someone describe it in their own words, having just lived through it. And so that blockhouse is a tremendous resource for those that want to get close to the action and hear descriptions of the sounds, to know exactly when something happened during the sequence of battle. It is, like I said, it's a very big place and you are outdoors. So you have the benefit of being both at a historic site, learning, going through a museum essentially, but being outside in this tremendous Perrysburg sunshine that we talked about.
Yes. And there's a great view of the river behind the fort as well.
Yep. So we do sit up on a high bluff. Fort Meigs is about 48 feet above the average height of the river. And it flows right past the fort. The river is the entire reason that the fort was built there during the war. Rivers are very important, not only as a source of fresh water for an army, but for transport as well, bringing supplies in on boats. And where Perrysburg sits is a special spot on the Maumee River, long ago called the Foot of the Rapids. This is essentially the only crossing spot on the river in the early 19th century and all time before it. If you go downstream from Perrysburg, the river widens significantly. It deepens. So if you're going to get across, you need boats. Above us on the river, which would be to the southwest, this is where the rapids begin. Very swift moving water, very dangerous to cross in the early 19th century and before. But right where Perrysburg is, the foot of the rapids, this is where the river narrows. This is where the waters are calm. And most times of the year, it's shallow enough that you could get across it on foot. So the army will be traveling through there. Supplies and wagons will be traveling through there. Spies and information will be moving through here. This was a tremendous choke point for all travel in the Old Northwest. And so the American army knows that. All the armies, the American Indians and the British, all know this. This will be a sought-after area for all three sides fighting the war. It's essentially the doorstep in and out of Ohio. And so as such, the American army is going to make their defensive stand there.
I'm learning history as I'm getting this interview. I love it. I thought you might say something about the river being a good source of food too. I don't know if you mentioned that, but hey, we got walleye around here, right?
Yes, historically speaking, the Army will use fishing in the river not only as a food source, but also as the men's sort of chief recreation on their days off. And we still get fishermen all the time. You can see them down there in the river, and it gives you a good idea of how deep the water is. You know, like I said, this is a crossing spot if you want to get wet. And you can see the remnants of fishing in the Fort Meigs Museum. So we still have the fishing gigs that they used, the fishing hooks and the kits like that, and then stories of them fishing. They wrote down how big the fish was and how many they caught. So fish stories are true in quotation marks in every age. Everybody's got their fish story.
I'm dying to know if people exaggerated or over exaggerated the size of their fish back then too.
No, it has to be. They talk about, catching 160 fish at a time.
Oh
They talk
my.
about being able to throw like your ramrod from your musket just throw it into the river and spear two fish at once on top of each other, using rags for bait because the fish were so hungry and they were so easy to catch, all that kind of stuff. And then just the sheer size of fish is always a fish story, you know. They never mention walleye, believe it or not, which is what everyone comes here now to catch. They mention, if you know fish types, I don't know, bass for certain, muskellong, muskies, and sturgeon, catching sturgeon in the Maumee River, which is a species that has been long gone for a long time. I know we've tried recent efforts to reintroduce sturgeon to the Great Lakes,
Mhm.
particularly here in Toledo, in Northwest Ohio. So that's an interesting story. But yep, fish stories, every age.
Awesome. I will have to look for that as well. And you said that's in the visitor center?
That is in the indoor museum within the visitor center. Yeah, the fishing gigs and a lot of the information. You
Okay.
come out. You come out to the fort itself. We can show you fishing kits that would have been common at the time, the cork bobbers that they use, and how they tied their fishing lines and the hooks that they used. We have all that stuff, and that's part of the living history of Fort Meigs. The interpreters can be there to show you and teach you all those things on your visit.
Good deal. Well, just to recap, three of the things that I heard you say that are must sees inside the fort itself are the interpretive panels, the blockhouses, specifically blockhouse number 6,
Hmm.
and the quotes that are inside blockhouse number 6. Did I get that right?
Yep, that all sounds good to me. That all sounds good.
All right. I know there's so many other things to see, but those are things that I don't know if I've particularly paid attention to. So anybody listening to this that hasn't been there before, they've got homework to do now, right, John?
Absolutely, and you can do it at your own speed, right inside the fort. There we have memberships, so you can join as a member that lets you in as many times as you want, indefinitely. So a lot of people take advantage of that, and our regular visitors, weekly, monthly, or just come to all of our big events and stuff like that. But you get to see familiar faces, and then you get to know your neighbors, and then it helps you feel more like you're part of a community. Definitely, when you can see the same faces and keep up with people.
It seems like membership used to be under $100. What is it nowadays?
I think membership is $60 for a Fort Meigs membership, and that's yeah, that's for the year for your family.
Yeah, and the season, like you said, it's around the 1st of April through sometime in October. Is that
The end
right?
of October, so like Halloween is typically our last day of operation. But your membership is going to get you into the museum. We do have a lot of events over the winter. We focus on things like, well, crafts mostly, things that we can do indoors. We have several tea sessions in January, February, and March. We have several sewing sessions through over the winter. We do have it's like a historic holidays event in December. So we're still active in the winter months for sure.
Oh, okay. So the visitor center is open all year round.
Yep, the indoor museum is open all year round, absolutely, and we'll be there. It tends to be a little bit quieter of a time, I think, just for naturally for everybody. You know, short, dark, cold days are periods of inactivity, dormancy for everyone. But that allows the historians there. This is our chance to do more research, to do more writing, for publishing papers or producing audio files such as this, podcasts, things like that.
Thanks
So
for
yeah,
being a good sport and
yeah,
coming out during peak season, by the way. As we record this, it's April 23rd, 2026.
it is 2026, and I have to say it is America 250. And if you work in military history, this is like the Super Bowl. We are busier than ever with outreach, in particular, speaking at different locations, helping them out with the historic things that they want to do in their own community. Our events are bigger and badder than they typically would be. We're getting a lot of help from Perrysburg. In fact, the Chamber of Commerce and things like that, just to help promote our events, to bring people's attention to the fact that, hey, if you're celebrating the independence of the nation, the birth of the nation, if you're where are you going to do that better than at a battlefield? Not every community in Ohio has a battlefield within their city limits, and Perrysburg is one. I mean, you just don't think of Ohio when you think of major battlefields and major US conflicts, but it's right here. And
Yeah.
it's a tremendous example, as we've talked, the largest fort in North America.
A lot of people forget about things that are in their own backyards.
Well, that's true. That's absolutely true. You know, when I lived in Cleveland for ages, I never went to the Rock Hall. I doubt New Yorkers go to the Statue of Liberty. So,
Yep, this is our equivalent. Yep.
mhm.
Well, you mentioned America 250 and events. So, can you talk a little bit about the events that are coming up here in your 2026 season?
Absolutely. The next big activity is our annual 1812 reenactment, which is always Memorial Day weekend. This year it is May 23rd and 24th. But what's special this year for America 250 is that Fort Meigs has been selected to host what's called the Grand Tactical. The Grand Tactical is a massive reenactment. It is held in the United States only every other year. It flips between a Canadian site and a US site. It was last held in the United States in Sackett's Harbor, New York, which is at the far east end of Lake Ontario. And Fort Meigs was magically selected for 2026, I think, knowing that it was going to be America 250. A lot of reenactors have already registered to be here. They come from all over the place. Many of them are familiar with the site. And I will say this, and I'm not just playing to the crowd here, a lot of reenactors enjoy Perrysburg, that they have felt welcomed by the community when they're out at grocery stores and you're dressed in funny clothes. When you're trying to tour around to see some of the other historic sites, if you are over near like Fallen Timbers or Fort Miami's, other sites that have connection to military history, everybody feels very, very welcome by the community, and that news spreads. And so we're expecting many, many hundreds of individuals. So this will be the largest living history event in North America this year for 1812. I'm sure there are maybe American Revolution events someplace, but the Grand Tactical, like I said, it was last in New York. There have been things in Baltimore and New Orleans, other cities that have great significance to the War of 1812. But it's a fabulous gift that the living history community has given us to allow us to host this event. And it is a magical way to celebrate America 250. It's going to be a really big show. Memorial Day is Monday, and we are upping the presentation for Memorial Day as well. The Perrysburg Parade will conclude at Fort Meigs, and we're going to have a special ceremony on our South Lawn, which is one of our cemeteries. We'll be honoring the dead that are buried there on our lawn, and we'll have the artillery there and the music, as well as the local bands and things like that. And this is all designed to make this weekend that much more special, the Grand Tactical Memorial Day weekend. But if you're celebrating Memorial Day and you're looking at fallen veterans, fallen heroes in American history, what better place to do that than at Fort Meigs, where we have so many buried on the property that died in combat. It's just another way to draw attention to the fact that Fort Meigs is a massive cemetery. It is a mass war casualty grave. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. We do have monuments on the property, headstones, but it's not a graveyard in a traditional sense where every single individual has their own stone with their name on it. These are mass graves that were done quickly, and you don't put up headstones outside of a fort. One, it lets your enemies know where your dead are buried. And two, you don't want your own troops looking over those graves and being reminded of where they are and what's at stake. That may play on morale, may question the allegiance to the mission. So, Fort Meigs is a cemetery, and it's part of our mission to expand knowledge to the local community of that. And I think Memorial Day is gonna hopefully be good education for everybody in those regards. We do a fabulous show on July 4 every year. We recreate exactly how the Army celebrated the 4th of July in 1813 when they were stationed. So Independence Day has meaning to everybody, even at that time. And it's a big 18 gun salute. That's what the Army did. They had a festival day. There were 18 toasts given by the officers, 18 songs played by the band, 18 shots from the artillery battery. And so we recreate all that. 18 is the magic number. That's how many states were in the nation at the time of the War of 1812. But it's a big festival day for us as well. And, when you look at how people thought about independence in a different time, it makes you kind of reevaluate how you think about independence, or it perhaps increases the depth of how you feel and think about independence. Sometimes I could be critical and say too many Americans treat the 4th of July as two things: fireworks and hot dogs on the grill. And there are deeper messages and meanings to the 4th of July that we could all explore. So the event that we do at Fort Meigs, I think, is a wonderful opportunity to do something different, to get outside of the backyard, the grill, the fireworks display, and really think about what the day means. And like I said, when you hear the toasts, what officers were celebrating over 200 years ago, what was important to them about the United States, how they felt about the nation and their enemies at the time. That really just kind of flips your thinking and adds, like I said, a little bit of depth to how you might approach the holiday. So it's a really unique way to celebrate Independence Day. I'm sure this year it's going to be huge because of the 250. We do an American Revolution event in August every year. This is the third weekend in August. I think it's like the 23rd, the 22nd in August. It's a weekend event. Most people don't realize that the American Revolution is fought out here. We think of Boston, we think of Yorktown when we think of the American Revolution, but this is a conflict that reaches far out into the frontier forests of the Great Lakes. So Ohio is really a battlefield, just an unstoppable battlefield from the mid 1700s until the end of the War of 1812. And the Revolution will be fought nearby. The British will anchor ships right here in the Maumee River during that conflict. So our Revolution event is looking at this entire time period, what we call the 60 Years' War for Ohio. And because of America 250, I think this event should have an extra emphasis. People should come out to see, the year 1776. And this is the perfect opportunity to do so. And the last one I'll talk about is an event in September. And this is going to be our big America 250 community picnic. This will be one of the signature events in Perrysburg's schedule, their civic schedule. So we're going to have a big spread out on the lawn there near the visitor center, not on the cemetery south lawn, but closer to the museum. And we'll have a big community day, everyone eating together, sharing together, and then the staff of the fort will be coming out and picking up people for specialty tours, taking them inside for an event that we call Life in Early Ohio, which is another reenactment where we demonstrate the trades of the time. So people can do a lot of hands-on stuff at the community picnic. We feature things like blacksmithing and leather working, certainly baking and cooking from the frontier. Lots of hands-on stuff, painting, plein air painting, chocolate production at the time, tomahawk throwing and things like this. That's a little bit more weaponized, I suppose. But the whole day is designed to welcome the community to our property, to celebrate the community, to celebrate the property as a community. And it's our opportunity to educate the general public. A lot of people don't realize how Fort Meigs is funded and how we sustain ourselves. And we really wanted the community picnic to be our opportunity to educate people on how we operate. Many, many people think that Fort Meigs is a state park, that we operate with tax money from the state government. And the truth is that Fort Meigs is a teeny tiny nonprofit. At best, we are 6 employees to do all the research, all the history, all the tours, all the upkeep. Right now, we are 4 in America 250 year, which is devastating on the human constitution to work that much. But we sustain ourselves through admissions, paid admissions. So you come to the site, you do pay an admission to go through, and that funds the upkeep of the property, that funds our research and operations, that puts uniforms and shoes on our feet. Fort Meigs is a member of the Ohio History Connection, which is another nonprofit, sort of our umbrella nonprofit. They are headquartered in Columbus, and that's the state connection there. So the property is theirs. The building and the exhibits belong to the Ohio History Connection, and we do receive a small stipend from that corporation to help us operate. The stipend from the Ohio History Center is about 1/3 of our operating budget. So, many people seem shocked that we charge admission, and they're shocked to learn that we're not a national park, that we're not a state park. And we just have to, and if it takes educating them one at a time with a handshake, what your admission pays for, that's important for us. So we were going to kind of go through all this with the community on the picnic day, and just let them know not only why the property is so sacred to us, but that it's important that we take care of that property, and we have limited money to do so, and we appreciate your help in that regard with a cheerful donation or a paid admission.
Thanks for busting the myth about funding.
It is a very unusual relationship the way that Ohio runs historic sites. So a lot of other states, you might receive direct money from the state government. The Ohio History Connection runs the state historic places on behalf of the state government. So the state government doesn't upkeep the sites. This massive nonprofit, the Ohio History Connection, runs it on the state's behalf, and they do receive money from the state government. But we, as the operating entity, the managing agent here in Perrysburg, are a completely separate nonprofit, and we are responsible for the upkeep of the property, the education that we do there, the school groups that are coming in, the curriculums and everything, the research that we do. And the signage and things like that is usually brought in by the Ohio History Center. We might write the material that's on it, but the actual production is done in Columbus. But yeah, we are a very teeny tiny nonprofit, desperately understaffed, and we do the best that we can, and we hope that everyone is patient and loving towards us.
Thanks for all the behind the scenes. I didn't know all that. And I've got to ask, because I'm somebody who cares about what's in my own backyard here, how can the people of Perrysburg or visitors help you in addition to paying their admission? Any volunteer opportunities or donation opportunities?
Donation and volunteer opportunities, absolutely. As a nonprofit, you can freely donate. You can join any of our membership lists. You can respond to our annual appeals. All of that helps what we do. Volunteer activities, absolutely. There's a couple of different ways you can do. We do have a volunteer group that assists us. This is the Old Northwest Military History Association. You could join them if you are interested in living history, if you're interested in being a reenactor. These people help us with our large events, help us with the setup of the large events, and just managing humanity on big show days. Other volunteer opportunities. A lot of our musicians tend to be volunteers that help me with the fife and drum corps. That's almost like a separate thing. And then groundskeeping, the landscaping, pulling weeds, planting flowers, things like that. Firewood is something that we desperately need in huge quantities all the time. So if you want to help us out, definitely contact the visitor center and myself. I wouldn't take it upon yourself to start clearing brush in our land without authorization, I guess. But yeah,
I wouldn't dream of it,
there are
John.
so many there are so many ways that you can help us out. Donations, admissions, 100%.
Okay, thanks for the info. And I've seen your website. There's a lot of good info on it. I think that's how we got connected. I just found the email address for the Fort Meigs Historic Site and reached out. Would you say that there's volunteer opportunities or just a way to get in touch there on the website, kind of like I did for the volunteer opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. You went the correct route on our website. The contact us, info@fortmeigs.org, and we'll point you in the right direction for what you want to do.
Okay. Anything else on the website that you want my audience to know about?
The website is very informative if you're looking for history in terms of the fort's role in the War of 1812. All of our events for the year are listed there, and that's January through December. That's not just the open outdoor season. That's all on the website. Educators, if you are a teacher and you want to know about opportunities to bring your classes there for field trips, about outreach, having our historians speak to your class, things that you can rent from us in terms of props, curriculum guides, educational manuals, all of that is under the education tab there. Volunteering and donating is part of the website. So you can donate right through the website from your phone if you so need to or so desire to.
All good info. Thank you very much. The website again is Fort Meigs, all spelled out FORT, Meigs.org, right?
MEIGS. Yeah, Megs.
Yeah, I'll tell you, whenever I'm doing, what is it called? Speech to text, and I say Fort Meigs, it ends up spelling it MEGS. So that's a good call out.
Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
FORT, Fort Meigs, MEIGS, fortmeigs.org.
Well, you can also access our podcast from there if you're a listener and this is your preferred medium is to hear people speaking. Our podcast doesn't have a tremendous number of episodes, and we are always producing more. But we try to set the mood. It's first person interpretation, so we're reading mostly from letters and diary entries to explain different facets of the War of 1812 to give you a better idea. So a lot of music, poetry, sound effects, and things like that.
And the name of the podcast?
The name of the podcast is The Foot of the Rapids. And again, that refers to this special spot on the Maumee River where Perrysburg is situated. The Foot of the Rapids, our delightful podcast. I have about 4 more episodes I really should do this year, and I really hope I have time to get to them because they're kind of special subjects.
Well, it sounds like you'll be very busy with Memorial Day,
Yep.
Independence Day, the
Yep.
picnic in September,
Yep.
and then, oh, I missed what is it, the American Revolution Day?
Yep, that's it's a weekend in August. Yeah,
August.
the third weekend in August. Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe after you get through all those things in October, things will slow down and maybe one a month until the new year. There you go. You'll get her done.
We'll hope. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all that information. At this time, I'm going to kind of turn it to, I guess, how people like me in the community view Fort Meigs and how we use it, and just kind of get some of your thoughts on that. And what I want to start with is the July 4th fireworks that are actually on the 3rd because you guys need the battlefield for the 4th, right?
Yeah, I don't know how that came about. The July 3rd fireworks, before my time in the area, but since I've been here, it's always been on July 3rd that we shoot off the fireworks. Fort Meigs has really nothing to do with the fireworks display. This is usually a joint collaboration between Perrysburg and Maumee, and the fireworks are shot off on the bridge, I believe, that spans the river, right in the center. It's just that Fort Meigs is kind of a front row seat to the show, and so people come out, and that's fine. We want to be good hosts. We just ask that while you're here, that we treat the land with respect, right? And that's really what we're talking about. And this episode is a perfect example. You know, we're getting information on the fort and why it should be treated with respect. You know, it's been a battle for us to get things like trash cans there so people have a place to put their food waste and other things like that. And then to get all that garbage moved out by the morning of the 4th so we can continue operation as a historic site on a historic day. yeah, Fort Meigs is the front row seat. So we just ask that we pick up after ourselves. We treat everyone kindly, and this is one of the situations where I think people get confused about the admission because a lot of people will say, "Well, I've never paid to be here before," and they're thinking of the fireworks because yes, on July 3rd we will open the gates to the fort as sort of a gift to the community, saying, hey, yes, this is a day to celebrate and we should all celebrate together. So the gates are opened. The blockhouses themselves stay locked, but people can come in. And I think that's where a lot of the battle comes from, getting people to acknowledge the admission and why we charge it. Because for the July 3rd fireworks are so popular that so many people are here, and that's their impression that the gates are always open and then you can freely walk around, and that is a one time of a year special
That's a
for the
gift.
fireworks. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I see that for the past 3 or 4 years, you've been offering parking for a fee, right?
Yep. This I can't remember exactly what year this came about, but we need somebody to help manage the amount of humanity that's on the parking and keep everybody safe. And if you have someone organizing cars, that makes for dismissal easier, that makes for getting more people in, that gets for more people to be close to the action. And so we have a company that comes in and manages the parking lot in that regard. Otherwise, it might be chaos, and people are parking everywhere, and that's maybe not appropriate for the cemetery spaces that we have and some of the squishier, swampier areas of the property that we don't want people getting caught in. So they are there to help organize and to keep everybody safe.
I got to ask you, you've mentioned the cemetery space a number of times. Where specifically is that so my audience knows not to park on it?
If you are pull into the parking lot, and you're in the large parking lot there along River Road, you are looking at the south wall of the fort, what we call the south wall. The space between the parking lot and the wall there is a path that goes down towards the fort. That lawn is cemetery space. Those, and there is a large monolith there. It was put in by the state of Pennsylvania in 1923. Those are our battle dead from May 5th, 1813. They died in an attack on British artillery that was positioned in what is now Fort Meigs Cemetery, like the modern public cemetery, is where the British cannons were. Those men charged across open ground and were shot down in their assault. They were victorious in that day, but it was very costly. It was 6 days before the army could retrieve those bodies because the battle was still on, the siege was going, there was no way to access them. Those men were in a advanced state of decomposition when the army could get to them. So they were not brought to our larger formal cemetery, which is on the west side of the property. They were buried there on the south lawn. And I don't know how much I should tell you, but they are very shallow graves because of the speed at which they had to be buried. And so certain activities on the South Lawn are not a good idea, particularly driving when it's soft like this. Absolutely no metal detecting on the property. Dogs can dig, and we've certainly seen dogs digging on the property. This is another danger. So that big south lawn is cemetery space. It's difficult to know where everybody is because this was a mass grave situation. So there could be it may not be even well kept rows the way that you think of a cemetery is. That's why it's special. That's why we have to be very careful. The traditional cemetery, the main burying place for the army, is on the west lawn of the fort. So that would be basically between the visitor center, the modern museum building, as you walk out to the fort itself. That whole west lawn, we have a large willow tree there, and we do have some stones from the state of Kentucky and the state of Virginia there. That was the main burying place for the army. Overall, historians have estimated that we have about 820 men on the property, which is a substantial number.
Yes, indeed. So none are actually buried inside the fort itself?
There are many graves inside the fort itself.
Okay.
Yes, those are even harder to detect. The fort is under siege, and if you died in the fort during the siege from the British bombardment, or if you had been sick beforehand, there was no way to take your body out to bury you in the burying places because the enemy was outside the gate. So you were interred inside the fort. Now, inside the fort, we have these massive earthen traverses, these big mounds of dirt that run the full length of the fort in crossways. These were defensive earthworks to protect the Americans from the bombardment, and they sort of sheltered on the lee side of these big escarpments. And it got so bad that the Americans dug sort of like vaults into these traverses, bomb proofs, we call them, places that you could crawl inside and hide. And in fact, the British will compare the American army to an army of groundhogs because of their tendency to be underground. If you died during the siege and we couldn't take your body out, you were simply placed inside one of those little vaults and you were sealed up. Archaeologically, we began finding them in the 1960s when the site underwent its largest archaeological dig. When they started finding them, evidence of them, they stopped the pursuit of looking for them. They found several of them, and it's like, okay, this is just going to keep happening. So we don't know exactly where they all are, but they are inside the fort. We do have 2 tombstones inside the fort. The first and last officer to die within the fort. It's difficult to say if their bodies are exactly where those stones are. It might make sense depending on the time of their death, which was fairly early on in the story of the fort. And then the highest ranking officer to die, Major Amos Stoddard, who was the head of artillery in the American Army, actually, during the War of 1812. He has a prominent grave within the site, within the fort's walls.
Thank you for answering my question. I appreciate you telling me about where exactly the cemetery and the graves are, because I actually did not know that. But you did mention dogs, and that's why you said that, having a dog dig could be bad. So let's talk about how the community views the property. I view Fort Meigs Historic Site as an unofficial dog park. Have you ever heard anybody say that?
Absolutely. And I mean, that's pretty clear from just general observed behavior on the property. A lot of people walk their dogs. And this is a tightrope for us to walk because we want to be good neighbors. We want to be community oriented. And we understand that this site is a beautiful green space and everybody needs to be outside. Everyone needs fresh air. Everyone needs to hear the wind in the trees. And we want to be good neighbors. I think you can walk your dog on Fort Meigs property. I think it would be best to keep it leashed. I have absolutely seen dogs attack other dogs on our property. I have seen dogs attack children on our property. And I have seen dogs digging on our property. Absolutely. And so frequently the staff will ask a dog walker to put them on the leash. And as stewards of the property, it would be nice if those wishes were complied with. Usually people do. Sometimes they don't. And an argument is unfortunate, but if we are tasked with protecting that land, we're also tasked with protecting the people on that land. Yeah, it's a difficult rope to walk, to be a good neighbor and want people to share in what you experience every day, the space and the peace of Fort Meigs. But we all have to take care of the property, not just the staff.
We can be good neighbors too. I think putting the best practices out there or putting your requests out there on this podcast may reach the ears that it needs to reach.
I certainly hope so.
There you go.
This is a wonderful medium to talk realistically about the property, not just how we're funded, but how we take care of it, and just to know that there is such a massive cemetery space. This just awakens the idea of care and respect for the property. People often, how should I say this? You wouldn't go sledding at Arlington National Cemetery, right? You wouldn't play kickball on John Kennedy's grave there, right? You wouldn't have a soccer game at Gettysburg. So I look at our property the same way. It's a military cemetery, it's a battlefield. That has to be foremost in your mind. So many people think that it's a park, that it's a public park, that it's a civic park, that the tax money, goes to that park. And then we have to think of it as just a special space. It's very unique in what the property is in that regard.
You mentioned sledding. I know that there's a very steep hill on the
Yeah.
backside of Fort
Yeah.
Meigs. You mentioned it's 45 feet above the river,
It is.
approximately.
Yeah.
And before I knew any better, my kids and I did go down,
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
sleds, and we found that it was too steep, too dangerous. You slide too far.
Yeah.
So we never did it. And then I
Yeah.
heard later on there's been a rule with the city where they don't want people sledding back there. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was primo sledding for a lot of people in the 70s and the 80s, as far back as we living can remember. And I understand it's awesome. There are a couple reasons we don't sled. It has been illegal since the Historical Society gained the property. It was written into law in 1962, I think. But there are a couple reasons that we don't. One is the simple land erosion. That hill is slowly moving away from the river towards the north wall of the fort. All of that land is seeping away, and sledding exacerbates that, especially if you sled down the same spot again and again and again, and then that tears up to bare earth. And when that snow melts, it just kind of takes all the dirt with it. Now, there are human remains on particularly the East Hill, which is not the hill that faces the river. There are no doubt artifacts in that North Hill, the sledding hill, that have yet to be discovered. But the East Hill, we have unearthed remains there as well. So protecting the land, trying to keep erosion from happening. We have a lot of small tree growth there to use the roots to try to hold the soil into place. But you mentioned steepness and danger. Yes, there was a day, and this is long before my time. I have only heard the stories where I think St. Luke's Hospital across the river actually called the site and asked them to stop the sledding that day because so many people had come in with injuries. If you are injured down there, it's very difficult for the ambulance crews to get to you. If you're going to try to get a gurney across a foot or a foot and a half of snow from the parking lot down there, that's not going to happen. And if you've got a broken leg or a broken back, it's very difficult. We have had very bad injuries to the skull due to sledding. And there was a day when the hospital called the police department and the fire department and asked them to shut down sledding because of the injuries that they were seeing all in the same day. And so it's not a good idea for all of those reasons. Protect the land, protect yourself, respect the property.
Thank you for those words of caution. If somebody didn't know any better, then they know now. Well, let's turn to a happier topic. The parking lot along West River Road has become a meeting place for a number of things. I'm going to throw out the cross country runners and the track runners. They meet all summer long, I think at 8 a.m. I forget what they call themselves, the river runners or something like that. I should know this because my son was one of them. So the cross country team meets there and they run around that multi use path towards the Perrysburg Maumee Bridge and towards Sidecut Park, etc. And then I've seen all kinds of people meet up for not only bicycle rides, but motorcycle rides too,
Yeah.
and car shows. So, would you
Yeah.
like to say anything about all of those meetups? Is it okay that they're using your parking lot? Do you encourage that? I'm just telling you how the community kind of views that parking lot. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow, it's a hard question, and it's similar to the dog walking in that we want to be good neighbors. We want to be a member of the community. It would be nice to know that you're going to use our parking lot. If you can imagine any other business, if you had a bakery in Perrysburg and everybody took over your parking lot one day and they weren't your customers, how would you feel? Right? Can your customers even access your product? So if people want to come and tour the site and every spot is taken, or there's a mass of people standing in the center where you can't actually drive your car to get to an open parking spot, that's crushing to the mission, right? That's crushing to our mission. We have rental opportunities. You can rent our classroom spaces, you can rent picnic areas, you can have an event on our property. And certainly, I've seen graduation parties, I've seen corporate parties and things like that, where you can set up a tent and you can have an event. And we're going to have the community picnic there in September, and that'll be very, very similar. If you want to have an event, that's okay. Let us know. There will be a rental fee to be, using our land and using our electricity and all that kind of stuff. So you can let us know that you're going to do that. But yeah, unauthorized use of the parking lot, this is not something that we're going to applaud. And I don't think any business owner would, right? Especially if it's compromising your ability to meet with your customers, it's compromising your ability to carry out your mission.
I can see it from your point of view. I'm glad I gave you this opportunity to talk about that because, like I said, I'm telling you what I see from the
Yeah.
community's point of view, and
Yeah.
you get to have your say too.
I appreciate the platform. Yeah. Yeah. And I just, put yourself in our shoes. We rely on those admissions and happy customers to continue operation. And if you can't get into the parking lot because there is a motorcycle show going on, I wish you could see me kind of jerking my head towards the microphone. What are you going to do?
I
So
know you feel conflicted. You want to be
yeah,
a good neighbor, but
yeah,
at the same
yeah,
time, without permission,
yeah.
it can be abrasive.
And
That's the
there, yeah,
word.
and there have been some ugly conversations that I've had to have with people that are using the property in a way that I think is improper. There have been some ugly conversations, and that hurts. Because you want to share what what you've learned about the property, why you care about it, and if someone's angry at you, they are not listening.
Yeah, that can be really tough. That's a tough situation. One of the things in my mind that I remember it seems like had permission to do was the junior high cross country meets. I think they used to call it Agony Hill or something like that. And they had permission, it seemed like, to use the parking lot. Can you remember? Do you remember any of that in your 9 years of being?
Oh yes, cross country is been there since I was there, and I know all about Agony Hill.
So
I've
they had
heard I've
permission,
heard the
right?
stories.
So that's a good example,
To my
maybe?
knowledge, no, they have never really asked for formal permission. This is sort of, we've always done this, we always will sort of thing. There has never been a formal relationship between the Fort Meigs Association and the schools for this.
Would you like the schools to reach out to you? We have a new superintendent coming in. He
So,
might want to know about
yeah, yeah,
this.
yeah. So, no, this has recently become a thing where I think earlier this year, the cross country has ceased running on our property. We had some, again, ugly conversations, altercations with some of the staff, my staff, but also the school staff as well, and principals and athletic directors and superintendents were involved in that conversation. And to my knowledge, I don't think they have returned for practice. I'm not saying that they won't be back and that we can't agree or negotiate something for the use of them. But yeah, there has never been a formal permission or a contract or any kind of agreement between Fort Meigs and the running units.
Wow, I didn't know that. I've participated in being abrasive to you. I'm not trying to get controversial. I don't
Yeah,
like to throw shade on this podcast or
yeah.
bring shame to anyone on either side of the conversation. But I think right now we have an opportunity to talk about what you would like to see moving forward.
I would love to see everybody embrace Fort Meigs for how unique and special it is. We've already said earlier in the show, not every community in Ohio has a battlefield in it. Not every community has a military cemetery in it, right? And we should rejoice in the fact that we are so unique and special to have this in Perrysburg. to have the river access that we do, to have this green space that we do, that we have a story that we can tell. Okay. I said earlier that the War of 1812 is very much the story of the Great Lakes, that other parts of the country have their own stories, but the War of 1812 is our story as Ohioans, as Great Lakers. And not only is it our story, but it's our job to keep that story and to tell that story because everybody else doesn't know it. And as Ohioans, we should be the keepers of that story. And I would love to see the entire community sort of embrace Fort Meigs for what it is, for how unique it is, for how special it is, for how it sets us apart from everywhere else. And that means, yeah, caring for the property. That means looking after each other. That means being respectful, asking for permission. So everything that we've been talking about is what I want going forward. I would like to have huge events where everyone comes to them and we all spend a weekend together remembering what happened here, you know? So visit the property, take a tour. We have nighttime tours as well. If you work during the day, you know, we're open on weekends as too. We're open in the dead of winter. You can come in and take a museum tour when it's cold and lonely. So, I mean, I hate to dodge the question. There's nothing specific that I'm looking for. I think Fort Meigs is gaining status on a national stage as a historic site, and the selection for the Grand Tactical is evidence of that. All of the outreach I've been asked to do this week is evidence of that. I've done TV with Chicago, Cleveland, Winnipeg, Windsor. So people are becoming aware, and I only feel that that's a reflection of how hard we've been working to take care of the place and do a good job in interpretation there. And we've suffered through those ugly conversations. We've suffered through the long, long hours. And I think it's paying off in a year like 2026 in America 250. I would hate to see any of that enthusiasm diminish after America 250 and everyone just forgets and it goes back to the dog park status, right? So, so everything that we've been talking about today is what's important to me, and keeping it beyond this year.
I'm not going to push for any specific, path that the school needs to take to have conversations regarding a cross country meet or anything like that. I got to say, diplomacy is not my forte. But I think that there's enough information and subtext in this conversation for people to make good choices and do good things and be patient and kind.
Mm-hmm.
And remember what this fort is for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And I think that's about it for the, I guess, unofficial uses of the Fort Meigs Historic Site and how the community sees you other than the visitor center and museum type things and
Yeah.
the fort.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to say as we wrap this up?
Nothing specific. I'm very happy for the opportunity. I love this format, this medium. I love talking about history, about the war, about our site. And I'm just so thankful to have the opportunity. I hope everybody listens to this well and takes the messages to heart. And I hope you all come out and introduce yourselves to me.
John Thompson, thank you so much for being here on the Perrysburg podcast. Take care.
Bye.
That ends my interview with John Thompson from Fort Meigs Historic Site. As you can tell, John is an excellent storyteller. He loves history and he loves helping visitors experience Fort Meigs. If you would like to hear more from John Thompson, head over to Fort Meigs, of course, you can do that. But you can also listen to him on the Foot of the Rapids podcast. John is the voice behind the Foot of the Rapids podcast. I checked it out on Apple Podcasts, so I know that that podcast player works, but you can also access it through the website, which is fortmeigs.org. That's FORTMEIGS.org, fortmeigs.org. As we wrap this up, here's a few takeaways from my conversation with John. First, Fort Meigs is more than something you just drive past. It's one of the most significant historic sites in our area. and there's a lot to see and do and experience once you step inside. Second, there's something for everyone. Whether you enjoy history, being outdoors, hands on learning, or community events, Fort Meigs offers experiences that can look different every time you visit. And speaking of, next time I visit, I'm going to be looking for historic medical stuff because I'm a pharmacist by training and I never thought to look for that before. And third, Fort Meigs is a place worth caring for. It's not just a green space, it's not a dog park. I know we talked about that a little bit, but it's a historic site, it's a military cemetery, and it deserves our respect as a community. I don't know about you, but I'll definitely look at Fort Meigs Historic Site a little differently after my conversation with John. If this episode inspired you, I encourage you to visit Fort Meigs, explore the museum, and walk the grounds. Experience Fort Meigs Historic Site for yourself. You can learn more, plan your visit, and find details about upcoming events throughout the season, including the events that John mentioned today in May, July, August, and September at fortmeigs.org. Thank you very much for listening to episode 145 of the Perrysburg Podcast. The show notes are on perrysburgpodcast.com. In the show notes, I've got all kinds of links. You'll find links to Fort Meigs Historic Site, which again is fortmeigs.org. You'll find a link to the Ohio History Connection, upcoming events, the Foot of the Rapids podcast, which John is the host of, a link to sign up for the weekly newsletter for the Perrysburg podcast, and more. Lots of links today. Everything you need is in the show notes for episode 145 on perrysburgpodcast.com. If you know someone who would like this episode, maybe they're a visitor from out of town or a family member who has not visited the fort yet, please share this episode with them. And if you like this podcast, come on back. You can subscribe to or follow the Perrysburg podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube so you never miss an episode. We've got a lot more coming up here in 2026. Thank you so much for listening today, and I'll talk to you next week.